Hey there, welcome back to the Steel City Media Podcast. Today we're going to be ranking all 7 volumes of The Dark Tower. So this video will contain major spoilers for the entire Dark Tower series. So if you haven't completed the series, this probably isn't the video for you. Although if you want to listen to an individual book in here, if you want to hear my take on that, you can definitely skip around in this video. But this is going to be a very free-flowing, long-form podcast format ranking of The Dark Tower. It's not going to be a quick video. We're going to kind of get into it here in depth, talk about these books. And today was actually the day that I finished the last book in the series. So my thoughts on the ending are still very raw. I will touch on it when we get to the final book in the ranking. However, I'm planning to do a more in-depth review of Book 7 later on, after I've had a little more time to really just think about and analyze the ending of The Dark Tower. But I did rank it still, and I am excited to get into the ranking here. So, yeah, this is a journey that I started about 2.5 years ago. I want to say February or maybe March of 2021 was when I first read The Gunslinger, and then today is the day that I finally finished this series. So, yeah, I'm really excited to talk about it. So let's go. Starting at number 7, the worst book in the series, in my opinion, is Book 6, The Song of Susannah. And there's parts of this book that I really do enjoy. I think the stuff with Roland and Eddie in Maine is really good, where they're looking for Calvin Tower and Aaron Deepno. The shootout that they have definitely mirrors the shootout that they have in Book 2, Drawing of the Three, which I'm a big fan of. And then, them running into John Cullum, who's a pretty interesting character. I like the interactions that they have with that. And I've even heard people say that the later books sort of mirror the earlier books. So if you are looking at it like that, and if this is Drawing of the Three's kind of mirror book in a way, because you have Roland and Eddie doing a shootout together again, and then you have Susannah, who's kind of dealing with I guess you could call it a sort of a split personality thing, although Mia, I guess, is sort of a different entity than Susannah, but it's still kind of the same in that she's having this internal struggle, which, we get a lot of that in Drawing of the Three with Odetta versus Detta. And then, Jake's kind of off doing his own thing where he's not in Book 2. So I kind of like the idea of looking at the series as kind of the books are mirrors to each other. I think that's a really interesting way, because 1 and 7 obviously kind of connect to each other, so they're mirrors in a way. I just talked about 2 and 6. 3 and 5 are very much like the action-adventure sort of books, and then obviously the middle one, Book 4, is the flashback. It doesn't really have a mirror, so I think that's a really fun way to look at the series. Really interesting to see how they all kind of connect. But going back to Song of Susannah, the reason why I didn't really care for this one is a lot of it gets into like the metaphysical stuff. A lot of this is like the inner struggle between Susannah and Mia, and I just wasn't really too compelled by it. I want to say well over 50% of this book is kind of just Susannah and Mia arguing internally. And there's definitely some of it that is interesting whenever they kind of talk about Mia's origins, when they talk about the motivations of Mia and the Crimson King a little bit. But overall, I think it's just a little redundant, especially for a book that's not that long. I somehow found a way to feel bloated. The ending of this book, I did kind of like it, but again, King sort of did what he did with The Wastelands, kind of doing an undeserved cliffhanger. And now, it didn't bother me much because obviously I had all the books. I didn't have to wait for them to come out, but I could see if you were someone at the time, especially if you had started the series all the way back when it first came out, you had to deal with that cliffhanger at the end of The Wastelands for, I don't know, 6 years till Wizard and Glass came out. And then if you have to deal with it again at the end of this book, I could see you being extremely frustrated with that. But and then also, of course, this is kind of a interesting book for another reason as well, and that's because Stephen King himself makes an appearance in this book. Now, I personally don't like the choice of going super meta. I don't like the fact that King did that with the final two books, really. It starts in Wolves of the Culla, but it's at the very end where they see the Salem's Lot book. But books 6 and 7 get extremely meta, and for me, I just don't like that narrative choice. However, you kind of just got to roll with it. You have to accept it for what it is. I thought he did kind of a good job of writing himself into the book. He doesn't come off as conceited or anything, but I'm still a little hazy on, how he created Roland, but how Roland is standing in his house. Like, for me, that still, the minutia of it really still kind of hurts my brain, but I don't want to get too far into that stuff because I really just want to focus more on the plot more than just the actual scientific breakdown of all this is happening. So, Song of Susanna, there were moments that I definitely liked. There's some standout moments, especially, that ending like I touched on with the Dixie Pig and Jake and Callahan going in there, and then that's where it kind of ends with the birth of Mordred happening. But we really expand on that more in the beginning of book 7. Like I said, we're left on a cliffhanger there, so it's a little bloated for being such a short book. The stuff between Mia and Susanna, I personally wasn't that big of a fan of, and I didn't love starting to go so ridiculously into the meta stuff. But overall, there are good moments. Coming in 6th place, I feel like this is going to be the most controversial placement on here. It's the Wastelands. I'm not a big fan of the Wastelands. I love Act 3 of this book. Whenever they get to Lud, I think it's incredible. However, I think the first 2 acts of this book are extremely slow. There's not much going on. It's kind of just building up to this climactic ending. And like I said, the 3rd act I really enjoyed. I wish more of the book would have been like that, the Lud stuff. But the 1st act is very much so just them kind of walking around in the woods. I mean, I get you have to do the training montage with Roland kind of teaching Eddie and Susanna how to shoot and become gunslingers and all that, kind of instilling his philosophy into them. I get all that. That's important stuff. It didn't have to take up as much time as it did narratively. I didn't care for that. Act 2 is whenever they finally bring Jake back into Midworld, which I thought was cool. I mean, obviously, very sensitive topic happens with Susanna, where she essentially has sex with this demon. Like, it's a crazy scene, whenever they're bringing Jake back in through this portal, and to distract the demon, they have Susanna, distract the demon by having sex with him, and basically traps his man parts in her woman parts. And that's what's able to allow them to buy them time to get Jake to come out. And I thought the stuff with the house was kind of neat. Whenever the house itself literally becomes like a monster and tries to kill Jake. That was kind of cool. But again, the first 2 acts, they're just, I know that they have a lot of world building in it, which I do like, but I just didn't like the pacing of the first 2 acts. They're very slow. Like I said, the highlight of the book is whenever they finally reach Lud and you get to see just what humanity has become at this point. They're just not they're not really good people. They're just kind of wandering around the city. They don't really have any motivations. They're kind of just brain dead. And we do find out that Lud is actually the future version of New York City. So that does kind of confirm that, this is a dystopian future of the world we're in a way. It's not an exact copy, but it is. We do find out, I can't remember if it was in book 6 or 7, but they do say that Lud is the future version of New York City. And I'm guessing that's after some sort of nuclear warfare went down, because you get a lot of hints of that, radioactive stuff and a lot of just demented and mutated creatures running around. It kind of makes sense. It kind of gives you that Fallout vibe, definitely, if you've ever played the Fallout games. That's how I kind of envisioned Lud. And you get some pretty interesting characters in Lud with Gasher, who just a disgusting, vile villain who captures Jake. You get the TikTok man, who I think had kind of an interesting intro, but didn't really pay off. He kind of just ended up being an easy villain for Roland to dispatch. But I did like the fact that Oi was able to help Roland get down to the TikTok man's headquarters. I like that Oi was actually able to contribute to the group and not just kind of follow them around. And this is Oi's first book, by the way. But yeah, and then of course at the very end you meet Blaine the Monorail, who's, I think, one of the more popular characters of the Dark Tower series, Blaine the Mono. And I touched on Blaine a little more in another video I did, but he's a fascinating character. Even if you could even call him a character, because, he's like this super intelligent AI computer that basically knows everything. And he's basically gone insane. Which is that in its own is a very fascinating thing to think about. Is as AI becomes more prevalent in real life, would it be possible for an AI network to kind of lose their mind like a human can? Because AI is designed by humans, and humans can go insane. So could AI go insane? It definitely brings up some really interesting topics, and obviously we expand more on Blaine in Wizard and Glass at the beginning of that book. So that's kind of my take on the Wastelands. I really like the third act, but the first two are just so boring. Very little happens. So that's why it's down here at 6. Number 5 is The Gunslinger. This is book 1 in the series. And I heard going into the Dark Tower that The Gunslinger is the worst book in the series. And so I've even heard people say, if you've ever listened to the Codex Cantina, which they do phenomenal videos on the Dark Tower series where they actually break down and analyze the books. So I definitely recommend going to watch them if you haven't seen their videos. But they did actually say that you could skip this book, which I think is just ludicrous, especially after reading book 7 and knowing how they kind of connect to each other. I think that's just wrong. And it's not them. They're not the only people who say that. There's a lot of people in the King fandom that say you can skip The Gunslinger and just go right to book 2. I think that's wrong. I think this book is really good, and it's really short. There's no fat on this. It's not bloated in any way. It gets right to the point. It does kind of read a bit of, a collection of short stories, but that's actually how it was written. So it kind of makes sense that it would do that. You kind of get to see some adventures of Roland on his own before he forms the new quartet. So, it's just a thrill ride. I really did enjoy this one. I was pleasantly surprised by this one. Definitely one of King's more unique books, because this is one where I really felt he used a different style of prose than he ever does. Because usually when King writes, he doesn't really try to put any fluff on his wording. It's just very straight to the point. That's his style of writing. This one felt a little more like he was trying to be more poetic with the writing style. So that could maybe throw you off a little bit. But yeah, and then of course that scene at the end is phenomenal. I think it's one of the standout scenes of the Dark Tower is whenever Roland and the Man in Black sit down and they basically just have a conversation about consciousness and the nature of the universe. Obviously, very, very heavy stuff. And King does a really good job of presenting these ideas. And I just really like it. So yeah, that's in there at 5. Let's see. 4th place is book 7, The Dark Tower. So this is, of course, the newest book that I've read in the series. I just finished it today. So it's still very new to me, the ideas presented in this book. And I will say, it probably is ranked higher than it should be just because of recency bias. Like I said, just finished it. If I do this list a month from today, it's probably not going to be this high. But that final section there at the end I really did enjoy it. I'm still very raw on my emotions with this one because I don't know if I like the ending or not, but the fact that it has me like so conflicted, I think, is a good thing. The fact that we basically learn this whole time has been just a big cycle, and it's everlasting, always repeating. Roland doing this quest from the start of the Gunslinger to the end of this book is all just one big cycle. And if you look at it that way, it's really not chronologically ordered. It's just one big cycle. And I think, King, he did hint toward this all throughout the series, because we hear how many times said throughout the series, Ka is a wheel. And you really don't understand that until you finish book 7. Because the very end of the Dark Tower, okay, so I initially thought that it just ended with Roland getting to the Dark Tower, the doors opening, Roland walking into the Dark Tower, and then I thought it was over. I thought that was like, King was just going to leave it unambiguous. You don't know how it ended. And if that was the case, I was going to hate it, because it's like, you don't know. Like, you didn't earn that. You didn't know. That was going to make me really mad. But after a couple, like, epilogue chapters, we get, like, an epilogue with Susanna. And then there's, like, an author's note from Stephen King where he talks about, like, how the journey is better than the destination, which is obviously, like a famous Brandon Sanderson thing from Stormlight Archive. But no, he actually says, okay, we're going to go on now. I'm going to finish the story. And he tells you it's Roland going through the Dark Tower. And as he's walking up the stairs of the tower, he sees just like different memories throughout his life. There's him as a baby. There's stuff with his friends. There's even towards the top, there's Mordred, of course, which was his only son. And then, of course, he reaches the very top. And this is where you learn that he just goes back to the start of the Gunslinger. He goes through the door at the top of the tower, and he enters the desert at the beginning of the Gunslinger. So that's I mean, it's very profound. It's very, wow. I mean, I had heard that, like, in a way, Dark Tower was a cycle, but I didn't think people meant it literally. I thought they just meant, like, in terms of the plot kind of cycles around, the same things kind of happen. I didn't think the story was actually going to loop around like that. So I actually enjoyed the ending, at least initially. Again, I'm only like an hour off of finishing this book, so initially I do enjoy the ending of the Dark Tower. I thought it was really cool. If you didn't like it, I could kind of see that too, because it's also a very depressing ending in a way, because Roland is just stuck in this forever loop of depression. I mean, like, because most of the Dark Tower is him going through some messed up stuff, whether it's getting his fingers bitten off or people he really cares about dying, and he just has to live this for eternity. And it begs the question, is Roland dead and this is like hell? This is like, I don't know. I really just, it brings a lot of questions to the surface for me. And I guess that is why some people could dislike the ending, is because it raises more questions than it gives answers. So outside of the ending, again, and I do intend to get a lot more bogged down with the ending later on and do a video just about the Dark Tower Book 7. But I do want to touch real quick on some of the other stuff that happens in this book before the ending happens, because that's what really dragged this book down for me. It's very bloated. There's a lot of stuff that happens in this book that's kind of like, I didn't really get what was going on. I mean, and it is bloody as well. You lose everyone in this book but Roland. Everyone else dies. Eddie dies. I thought Eddie's death was extremely underwhelming. Like, he just gets shot by this random, like, boss that they kill. I didn't really care for Eddie's death. I thought that was kind of silly. But, again, it did need to happen, I guess. But I thought Jake's death was a lot more... I don't know if fitting is the right word, but I did think his death was a little more fulfilling. And I kind of hate/love the way he did the stuff, the tie-in with his accident happening, because the side of it that I hated was that the fact that it's even in this book, because, again, I don't like the meta choice to have that in this, but the side that I love is I think he did it really clever how the way King, because initially in the narrative, King died from this accident, but their mission in the book is to go back and stop King from dying from this accident. So that's essentially what ends up happening in real life canon for this is Jake and Roland went back and saved King. They like pushed him out of the way. Jake jumped over King to like absorb the blow from the car, and it ends up crippling King, but it doesn't kill him. You know, he has a bunch of broken bones, but he doesn't die. But it ends up killing Jake. So Jake does like sacrifice himself there to save Stephen King, so he's able to finish the series. So yeah, that's really good. You have the stuff at the beginning, of course, with the Dixie Pig and Callahan and Jake going in. And Callahan does kill himself. He's basically like the horde of the low men and all the creatures in there just jump on him. They're about to devour him, and then he just shoots himself. So kind of a lukewarm ending for him. I mean, I like the fact that he ultimately in the end was the one who was, you know, the master of his fate instead of just getting ripped apart by vampires. So it was okay. Overall, really heavy book. A lot of stuff going on. I've rambled enough about it, so let's move on to third place, which is Wolves of the Kala. This one is very much more lighthearted than The Dark Tower 7. This is like just a nice adventure, kind of low in terms of scale because, you know, the books 6 and 7 are really just so high in scale with the fate of the universe on the line. This one's just about like saving a little town, but I like it. It's kind of like a breather after the wild end of book 4, and like I just talked about books 6 and 7. I did enjoy this one, and King does what he does best, where he kind of introduces you to an entire town. You kind of get a day in the life of all these people in the town. You get their backstory. You kind of get to know everyone in there. And he does this great, and all of his, you know, not all, but a lot of his more well-known books, he does that. Salem's Lot, you get to know the whole town, which ironically is featured at the end of this book. And even in it, you kind of get an introduction and know the town of Derry. So I'm a big fan of when he does that. He does it really good here. And the interactions between Roland and the different people in the town is, I really like it, how they view Roland as like the gunslinger, and not even just Roland, the whole quartet. They view them all as gunslingers. I really thought that was cool. And I felt like Eddie really came into his own in this one, where he is kind of seen as an equal to Roland by the townspeople in terms of being the gunslinger. So I liked that. I did like Andy the messenger robot. I didn't expect to like Andy as much as I did, but he turns out to be a chilling villain in this one because, you know, all the kids trust Andy and, you know, he sings to them and all that. But it turns out he was actually, like, taking the kids and giving them to the wolves. So that was very dark. It got dark quick with Andy. He's a good villain. And he was sort of defeated similarly to Blaine by Eddie. So that was kind of cool, a little tie-in there. And then the ending, I thought was a little underwhelming just because we built up so much to this final shootout, this battle to happen with the wolves, and it's kind of over in like 5 pages. Like, and Roland even says before it happens, like, all this build-up is just really for 5 minutes, and that's exactly what happens. Jake's friend Benny dies, which is like heartbreaking because he's Jake's age, and this is like Jake's first time really dealing with a death of someone around his age. And Jake even starts to come into his own in this one. You know, Roland gives him a cigarette at the end of the battle, and he smokes it, and it's kind of like a sign of he's becoming a man, so that's cool. And then, you know, just the stuff with Callahan at the end I thought was cool, where he finds the book Salem's Lot, and he's kind of freaking out like anyone else would in that situation. But yeah, that is Wolves of the Kala. Just a fun adventure book. It's been, you know, described as like a version of The Last Samurai, which is just essentially this dude saving the town. That, I know it's derivative, but I just enjoyed Wolves of the Kala. Second place is Drawing of the Three. This is one of the more fast-paced books in the series. It's kind of like bang, bang, bang. It just goes. You start off with Roland waking up on the beach where he had talked to the Man in Black and the gunslinger. He gets his fingers bitten off, and then, he draws in Eddie and Susanna into his world. And obviously she's not Susanna at the time. She's Odetta Holmes. Or is it Odetta Walker? I can't remember. But yeah, I mean, I especially love the whole section with Roland and Eddie. Whenever he first kind of enters Eddie's mind is some of my favorite stuff in the Dark Tower. Whenever Roland's kind of first seeing New York City, whenever he's first realizing he's on an airplane, he's in something that's flying, his mind is kind of blown. Just the fish out of water stuff with Roland is phenomenal in this book. And his connection between Eddie, they start to develop, is really great. Also, them whenever they have to get the drugs out, I absolutely loved that sequence. Whenever Eddie's in the bathroom on the plane, but he still has all the cocaine strapped to his body, but Roland's able to take the drugs out and bring them into his world. So whenever they eventually bust into the bathroom to get Eddie, he doesn't have any drugs on him, and they have to end up letting him go. I loved that whole sequence. And, of course, the shootout at Balazar's is a standout moment, not only in this book, but in the series as a whole. This is just a absolute thrill ride of a book. And, of course, you get the Odetta stuff. Deals with some deep kind of split personality issues. You get Jack Mort, who we learned is actually the guy who pushed Odetta into the trains, which costed her legs. And I think he kind of has a bit of a satisfying conclusion where Roland just uses his body to commit all kinds of different crimes, like stealing stuff from the gun store, shooting at cops, and then eventually when Roland leaves, I can't remember if either he gets shot by cops or if he gets hit by the train at the end. I can't remember because, again, first time I read this, or last time I read this book was 2.5 years ago, so it's a bit fuzzy for me. And then, of course, at the end, it's a pretty satisfying conclusion where they're all kind of on the same page, because they were all kind of arguing for a big chunk of this book. Roland was kind of relying on Eddie to help him survive by getting the medicine and kind of dragging him around on the beach. But by the end, they're all united, and Odetta/Detta morphs to become Susanna. And you get basically the formation of the new quartet. That brings us to first place, Wizard and Glass, my favorite Dark Towers book. And I wouldn't have expected this to be my favorite because I typically do not like flashbacks. And essentially 90% of this book is just one big flashback. So when going into Wizard and Glass, I was definitely hesitant, but it turned out to be incredible. I really did enjoy it. And I think a big part of why I liked Wizard and Glass so much is the way you enter the flashback. You're just dropped right into this meeting between Susan and Rhea. And King doesn't hold your hand and describe what's going on here. He just throws you right into this scene, and it's incredible. Rhea is, I think, one of King's best villains. She is just absolutely horrifying and just this vile, disgusting creature. She has such horrible views of people, and she uses such disgusting words to describe people, and I just love her as a villain, and how she's just kind of slightly manipulating things in the background, and she basically watches everything unfold through Merlin's grapefruit, the magical orb she's given by the coffin hunters. So she's great, and then just all the stuff going on between the coffin hunters versus Roland and his people is great. We get so many different matchups between them. Of course, that scene in the saloon where DePape almost kills Sheemy is phenomenal. That's like your stereotypical Western, everyone's got a gun pointed at them scene, and it's done very well. And all the outer lore stuff going on around Hambry, the politics going on where they're basically giving the oil to John Farson, who's the enemy of the Inner Baronies. They're supposed to be supporting the Inner Baronies, but Farson's giving them way more money. So that's why they are supporting Farson. They're trying to keep it secret. That's why they don't like Roland and his friends poking around, because they don't want them to find this stuff out, especially for Cordelia, who knows that her brother, Susan's father, was murdered by the people who are trying to keep this all a secret. So it's very layered. It's not just this backstory. There's also a lot of world-building lore going on, because it's not just what's going on in Hambry. It's also this politic, in the shadows scheme going on with the people from the town. So I really enjoyed that. And if you want more on Wizarding Glass, I actually have a review of Wizarding Glass on this channel you can go listen to. It's a little more in depth. I talk about the stuff more. But that has been my ranking of the Dark Tower series. Like I said, I do plan on releasing a Book 7 review later down the line after I get more time to think about it. But please, if you made it this far, I really, really appreciate it. Go ahead and leave a like and subscribe. And comment down below your ranking of the Dark Tower series. Thanks for listening.